Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Big Bros podcast. My name is Jeremy. Welcome if it's your first time joining us. It's great to have you on the show. I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Ilan. How are you going, mate?
I'm a bit better today. I've recovered from Thursday night. If you're viewing this on our video format, you'll see that both Jeremy and myself are wearing our scarves because both Melbourne and Carlton are facing off with one another on Friday night in a very exhilarating semi-final that is in the cauldron that is the MCG. But on Thursday night, I was left quite bitterly disappointed. I've recovered today. I'm hoping that there'll be a nice big response from the boys in the red and the blue, but I imagine your experiences are much different to mine.
Mate, it was just a whirlwind of positive emotions with some nerves embedded in them as well for Friday night. On Friday night for us Carlton fans, we did get a bit of a scare from the Sydney Swans, but you know what? We were just happy to be there. And I think I speak for a lot of Carlton fans. We were just happy to be a part of the theatrics of what is AFL finals.
That is such bullshit. I came into your house and all the lids were off.
The lids are off.
The lids were off everywhere. Your mum didn't have a lid on the Tupperware container with all the food. I was so confused.
They're all gone. But you know what? They've been gone for a while with 9 wins in a row and a little mishap against the Giants. But we're back and we're happy to be in the finals. And it was just a special Friday night. I mean, I was there with a couple of my really good mates along with my old man by my side. And you know, there were tears of happiness on the final siren. It was a very special moment, and I'm keen to do it all again against the D's, who their supporter group often strikes me as a pessimistic supporter group at times.
Oh, do you want me to explain why?
Yeah, look, you've had your past
No.
trauma.
I'll explain to you why. Yes, you're right. Past trauma. Imagine as a D supporter, your last premiership up until 2021 was in 1964.
Yeah.
That is a long time. And through that period, you've faced adversity, trouble, so many rebuilds that haven't actually ended up in success. At best, you ended up in a grand final and then you got smashed by the Bombers in 2000. Then, on top of rebuild, you get into finals in 2018. And it's a very similar experience to Carlton, in which you're almost outperforming what people had of you, like the expectations. But that trauma, getting beaten by Geelong in 2011, that saw Dean Bailey get the sack, that stuff lives on and it stays with you. It stays in your biology. It takes a lot of premierships as the antidote to get rid of that. So that's the reason why.
I get it. It's true. You know, I do think there's merit in saying that, but you are a good football club now, so I think D's fans need to stop catastrophizing, mate.
Well, find us a key forward.
And I think that leads us in to this week's episode where we talk about catastrophizing, how we can conquer catastrophizing, because it's something that is really prevalent in our lives as young adults, something that we all generally experience when we start to experience new novel scenarios as well, when things are just, you know, bubbly and fresh, and we think a lot about what ifs in the good and the bad way. So we're going to be talking about ways in which we can conquer these catastrophic thoughts in which we might have, because, you know, if we can think about ways in which we can alleviate any sort of mishaps along the way in our thinking, then we're all going to be coming out for the better. So let's dive into it. Now, Ilan, tell me, what is catastrophizing in your mind? How would you describe catastrophizing?
I think of catastrophizing as always thinking of the worst possible scenario based off what you're currently experiencing. So we had David and Ben on from Toolbox Education, and they said catastrophizing is a real prominent thing amongst teenagers, especially those studying. As an example, you catastrophize it if you do really poorly on your Year 11 SAC. That's going to translate into you doing poorly on your Year 12 assessments, inevitably influencing a really poor ATAR, which means you won't get into the degree you want, which means you won't get into the job you want, which means you won't have any money, and therefore you will die and end up homeless. That's probably
extreme catastrophizing.
That is extreme catastrophizing, but our brain there's a individual called Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he speaks about this whole phenomenon that the brain and what we think about and the feelings we can feel sometimes, we find it really difficult to actually disentangle what we feel from objective reality. That's why people talk about like the benefits of the law of attraction or whatever. That's a whole other topic. But the idea is that in our brains, imagination runs riot. As you said, it could be for good or for bad. The problem there is that when we can imagine everything and there's no boundaries in our brains, we think of everything to its extremes. And since we feel like it's a bad scenario and we feel like it's reality, because we can't disentangle what's real and what isn't, we can start feeling depressed. We can start feeling anxious. Our self-esteem goes down the shitter because we are genuinely thinking that by one thing turning into a bad thing, that's going to be reflective of reality. So a lot of solutions cater towards actually overcoming catastrophizing, we'll get into them, is things about getting yourself out of your head and getting yourself into a position where you can think logically, rationally, with a sense of composure.
Ultimately, though, it's probably also our brain's way of protecting us, because if we're presented with a situation where, like we often say, we might have a pros and cons list in our mind, and there are some cons in that situation, it's probably our brain's way of thinking, look, don't go down that rabbit hole because you might come out second best. And it's our brain's way of protecting us from not going down that rabbit hole. Would you agree?
Oh, 100% agree. I'm really glad you brought that up, because if you look at the whole fight or flight thing, back in the day when we were fighting saber-toothed tigers, back, in our ancestral days, we had something that was built into us that could detect danger.
Yeah.
It could send our blood pumping into our muscles to signal, okay, we got to run. We got to raise your heart rate so we can pump more blood throughout your body. That's actually something that's been inbuilt, and it's a good thing. People think it's a bad thing because there'll be times during the day where you perceive something as dangerous and we enter this flush of fight or flight. Now, that's just a mismanagement of the system.
Yeah.
You don't want to get rid of the system. But the problem is, I think in today's society where we don't actually have genuine, not to the same degree of threats that our ancestral descendants had, we perceive things that we think as a big deal to way greater of an extent. So using that whole, you're doing poorly on an assessment, or you're going to get humiliated if your crush rejects you.
Yeah.
We view these things as literally critical to our life or death. What happens then is we then are constantly in that state of stress. We're constantly in that state of what's called allostatic load, which is the idea that you're constantly putting your body under stress, anxiety. I've got to ask you something. Has there been a time in your life where you were really stressed and anxious and you were feeling like you were on edge? Think of the time like where you've had a coffee and that feeling of caffeine just rushing through and
Just
you're feeling
hits you
jittery.
like a truck.
Now imagine you're feeling like that for a day or two, but negatively. You're
Yeah.
thinking you're really anxious about something that's happening in your life. And then once you kind of relax and settle down, you come down with an illness.
Exactly. Yeah. Most recently, when I think of that, it was probably when I was away traveling a few months ago, which I've spoken about here on the podcast before. But being in a foreign country, I was in Germany, didn't have any phone connection, needed to find my way around the suburbs there and get myself to my destination, which was a long way away from where I was at the time. And in that moment, you start getting those hot flushes. You start thinking, holy shit, I can't do this. And you start thinking about the worst situation possible being, I might not be able to get to that destination. What would happen then? I'm going to be stuck. I might be on the street tonight. And your brain starts going in through this rabbit hole of emotions and situations to the point where it is an ultimate distortion of reality and just a false perception of what is actually going on. So for me, what was best in that situation, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true, is just taking a deep breath and paving the way one step at a time, thinking about, all right, what is the first step I need to do to tackle this situation, okay? And ultimately realizing first that I was in that situation and I was catastrophizing was really, really helpful for me because it allowed me to stamp that out and actually relax and think about what I needed to do from then on to avoid that. And then it more so just became like a challenge for me. How was I going to tackle the situation rather than how was I going to let the situation tackle me?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Like, you're going to be in those uncomfortable situations a lot in life, and it's probably a really good skill to get at, which is knowing how to navigate uncomfortable situations. Because if you haven't really experienced many of those situations before, what might actually happen is that you start catastrophizing in those scenarios because you don't have any kind of evidence or past experience to be like, well, we've actually experienced this and that, and this is nothing bad happened. You don't actually have that almost litmus test in the back of your head telling you we've experienced something similar before, it'll be fine again. That's why I think embracing uncomfortable situations and experiences where you're almost like a, you know, Bambi on ice. You're not professional. You're an imposter. That can be one of the best things at actually developing your ability to handle uncomfortable situations and prevent the whole catastrophizing scenario of happening. Would you agree?
I do agree. I think it can be hard to take the mindset though if you've been exposed to things in your past that, you know, might resemble some level of trauma, especially in your childhood. If you've experienced, maybe you grew up in an environment or in a family that, you know, worry was a big factor, you know, whether it would be financial burden, social burden, whatever it might be. If worry was really prevalent, that could lead you down the road of catastrophizing in a lot of situations, because, you know, ultimately there's a lot of things along the track that might pose as roadblocks to the situation, and that's scary. And if you've experienced a lot of that at a young age, it can probably lead you to thinking along that same mindset later on down the life as you get older. So I think, you know, childhood trauma comes into this, and it's a hard thing to overcome as we get older. So it's really great to, you know, sit here and talk about overcoming it, which we will. We'll talk about a lot of solutions in which we can pose to overcome it. But it's also about recognizing that it's not an overnight thing, especially if you have experienced some of it in the past.
Yeah, I mean, our brains are association machines. Think of the time you got food poisoning over something that you really enjoy eating, like habitually. It's like something that you love. Suppose it's a steak. My dad actually had a similar experience. He used to love eating steak, and then one time he had food poisoning, hasn't had steak since. And that's your body's way of essentially saying to you, let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. Let's actually maximize our chances of survival, which is, in what sense, your body is, it's that kind of, not the fight or flight, but it's your evolutionary inbuilt system trying to keep you alive.
Yeah.
By the same token, though, what we experience in the past isn't necessarily going to inform an accurate picture of what the future is. The whole thing about association is that if, I don't know, we'll take like a really good example that's pretty common. Suppose you had a partner and before they broke up, an ex-partner, and before they broke up with you, they started becoming a little bit off with the way they were speaking.
Yeah.
I don't even have to say what off is. Everyone just knows what it means. You know, maybe shorter responses, the tone of voice.
Bluntness, yeah,
a very common thing that people our age experience. And then that precedes, you know, the ex breaking up with you. Now, in the back of your head, you're going to have all these flurry of emotions. You're going to be upset. You're going to be devastated. Suppose a few years go by and you enter a new relationship and you maybe haven't actually worked through a lot of your trauma, which you can't, you can only do so much of, I guess, trauma healing single. But irrespective, suppose you're with someone and once, you know, there's a day that goes by where they're a little bit more distant with you and it resembles a lot of the similar things that happened, you might start thinking, well, shit, are they going to break up with me like my ex did a few years ago?
Yeah.
And the problem there is it might have nothing to do with it. They could have been busy that day. They could be at work. They could be stressed. A myriad of factors may be affecting the fact they're not messaging you in the way that you would feel comfortable and safe. The problem there is, and I think you touched on it earlier, is that it can be dangerous, but we can also start projecting our insecurities on other people because of the fact that we're association machines.
Exactly. And I think that's when it becomes even more dangerous, because catastrophizing for your own self is one thing, and that's obviously extremely dangerous since we are the main character in our own lives. But if we start doing that onto other people, you're only going to push people away from you, and that is what you really do not want to have, because, you know, we want to be surrounded by people that want to bring us up, not bring us down. And if you're a warrior and catastrophize a lot about situations, people aren't going to want to hang out with you, essentially, and then you are going to be left alone, which is just really unfavorable and something that we wouldn't wish for anyone to experience. So the best part about acknowledging that you are catastrophizing is nipping it in the bud for yourself before it gets to the point where you start projecting it onto other people. Because I know for myself in situations, and I know when I start personally catastrophizing and thinking negatively about a situation, it's almost like it's a waking call for me. Because if I was to then replay that in my mind over and over again, I would start to then probably speak it out loud and replay it to people around me, which no one wants to hear about, right? So if I can replay it to myself first and have that ability to be aware of it as step number one, be aware of what I am thinking, then that is going to save the people around me, but it's also going to allow me to basically activate some sort of response to what I am experiencing.
So that's really cool, because you're pretty much saying, let's not live life on autopilot here. Let's not let these catastrophizing thoughts dictate my next behaviors and project it onto other people. What you're suggesting instead is that you kind of zoom out of the situation, see it for what it is, and say, okay, I'm really scared right now of what this situation might lead to.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware of the fact that this is my brain making up a narrative that isn't necessarily true.
Yeah. And it's about being vigilant of yourself in the situation, because taking that third person approach can be really powerful. You know, we are the main character in our own lives, and if no one is going to tell us how to live our lives, which is what we wouldn't want, it's going to always be up to us. If you are on your own, it's always going to be up to you. So we need to have the power in our lives to take that third person approach and to look at ourselves from a distance, from outside that camera lens, and take the look in and be hyper aware of what we are experiencing.
I completely agree. I think sometimes people might hear what we're saying and say, well, you don't know the extent of my trauma. I can't help the fact that I behave. And look, there's no discounting maybe potential things that you've experienced that are just absolutely devastating and has rewired the way you look at the world. The thing is, though, and it's going to sound almost insulting, but the past is the past, and we have so much control over how we can mold the future, because we're always evolving, and we can actually do things in the present moment to allow us to almost like change our relationships with our past. A lot of, like, for example, the whole purpose of like working through trauma is building a relationship to it that reframes the experience. So suppose you had a really bad breakup and you initially thought it was, I'm not good enough for that person. You know, they didn't love me. There was nothing about me that was lovable. Like, what do I have to offer? You know, that could have been a really, really traumatic experience. And you might come out of that thinking, well, you know, why would I ever want to pursue another relationship? Because I was unlovable to one person. I had nothing to offer. And the problem there is, if you start to kind of almost reframe that trauma and you start thinking instead, well, could it have been potentially that I do have something to offer, but what I was willing to offer wasn't right for them in that moment in time? Automatically that language shift and what you tell yourself is so important. And even what I just said there, that's less emotional, and that's actually more logical and rational, and it sounds more like actual reality. And that's, I think, the key to getting out of the whole catastrophizing thing, is getting out of your mind and getting into reality.
Yeah, it's changing your beliefs. It's changing your beliefs about yourself. It's changing your beliefs about the potential situation, because like we said, catastrophizing is a perception whereby you're distorting the potential reality of the situation in front of you. So if we can have the ability to challenge our own beliefs and ask ourselves, well, in this situation that I am in now, is there actually any facts backing this up? Or am I just basing something off pure assumption here? If we have the ability to ask ourselves that question, it can lead us down the road of becoming more rational and logical thinkers. Because in that moment of catastrophizing, we are irrational, we are illogical. We're going to think that the worst case scenario is going to happen to us, especially if we have experienced something similar in the past. So we've spoken about having that awareness to take a step back and look at ourselves in third person, but then challenging our beliefs and thinking, well, what am I actually basing this off? And is there any truth in it? Can really help us in paving the way forward to act on other tasks to allow us to implement, erasing this catastrophizing thinking from our brain. So if we take that into mind and we've got that step of awareness and challenging our beliefs, what do you reckon is a task that we can then implement to erase catastrophizing?
I'd even go before that. I think sometimes if we're in situations where we're catastrophizing really bad situations, our arousal levels, our ability to think clearly is compromised. And Andrew Huberman, the great neuroscientist, says you can't change the mind with the mind, which is, again, you can, but take that with a grain of salt. The first thing you want to do is get your mind into the present moment. And it's going to sound like I'm preaching a little bit about mindfulness here. And on one hand, I am, but I'm not necessarily preaching about meditation where you're sitting under a lotus tree.
Which we often joke about.
Yeah, we often joke about. I love it. But the whole thing about mindfulness is the idea that you're trying to direct your attention to the present moment.
Yeah.
And you don't have to engage in meditation necessarily for that. Things like deep breathing, which isn't for everyone, is really great because you get more oxygen into your brain and you get more blood pumping into, or more, I think you'd be getting more blood flow pumping to your kind of the thinking parts of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. What that does is it actually guides you and anchors you to be like, okay, what's happening now? I'm thinking about where I am now. Another thing you can do is body scanning. The whole idea behind body scanning is if you're sitting down or lying down, you literally close your eyes and you start thinking about, how does my hand feel on the pillow on my lap? How do my toes feel? How does my head feel? And the whole thing here is you don't actually judge. You're not judgmental to yourself. If you've got a tight neck, you're not thinking, I've got a tight neck. Why do I always have to have a tight neck? You're more so non-judgmentally just looking at it from third person and thinking, okay, I'm just focusing on the present moment. Now, if none of those options resonate with you, which is totally fine, mindfulness can be anything that literally sucks your attention into the present moment. For me, that's playing hockey. I love field hockey and I love gym. If I'm trying to PR on bench press, because I skip legs, so I'm not going to use squats. But let's say I'm trying to PR bench. The last thing I'm thinking about is my assignment tomorrow and how I'm going to fail it. I'm probably thinking about, I hope this doesn't break my chest and my sternum. So things like that, although I'm joking about it, it's really, really true because what people misconceive about mindfulness is that you're going to feel calmer after. That's not actually the intended consequence of it. It's a byproduct of it, but the reality is you're just returning your body to its normal state, and that's being able to be focused. Because that's the whole thing about mindfulness is your ability to remain focused. And they've done brain scans on people who have done like mindfulness meditations, and they find that the amygdala, the fear part of your brain, that actually the signal decreases on that, and post mindfulness, the signal increases in your prefrontal cortex. After you've done that, there's a good little, once you've lowered your arousal levels, the best thing you can do is question your beliefs, because now at least you're thinking logically.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do there is step one, you ask yourself if your catastrophizing thoughts are actually really true. Is there another way of interpreting it? Is your bad mark on that assessment, that girl rejecting you, is there another way of interpreting it other than I'm the worst person in the world and I deserve to die? Usually at this point, you're starting to think, okay, well, maybe there is a way to interpret it differently. Step two, if you still feel like it's the worst thing in the world, you ask, honestly, how does this belief make you feel? The thing is, even if something is true, if you know it's not good for you, we need to take steps potentially to alter your mental models. Because just because something is true and it's making you feel like shit, it's not necessarily going to be useful for you to get out of that. So that's step two. Step three is also just imagine a world where this belief doesn't exist. How would you feel knowing that the ways of your catastrophizing thinking isn't influencing your daily life? You'd probably be more at peace. Why don't you owe it to yourself? You probably owe it to yourself to live that sort of life where you're not so anchored by negative thoughts. And step four is consider the opposite of that belief. Is there potentially another reality? And come up with 3 alternatives to why the opposite might be true.
Yeah, I like that because often we think about the situation we are in. If we're catastrophizing about something, we're thinking of that exact situation, what is going on in that situation, and how it's just going to ruin us in that moment. But that tip about actually thinking about a different situation, think about a situation where actually the opposite is happening or the opposite might happen and how that might make you feel is really powerful because it's kind of distracting your mind away from what it is you're catastrophizing about and kind of changing your mindset and thinking about, well, let's change the narrative to what if. What if something occurred positively for me rather than negatively? If we can get into the habit of having that mindset shift, having that positive self-talk and thinking, well, you know what? Things that happen, things that are happening for me might actually be good for me. If we think it's happening good for us rather than bad for us, it might incur different actions from our behalf. And that can be a really powerful thing, because even if the situation does present itself as negatively, sometimes you might just feel like you're at a roadblock, and that roadblock might have no way forward. So if you can think of a way in which you can get through that roadblock, which might just be looking at the situation as happening for you rather than to you, that can really be the start of something really powerful in changing that whole mindset shift and way forward.
I love that. I was scrolling on Instagram yesterday and I saw, Alex Hormozy?
Yeah, gun.
Yeah, he's a gun. I love what he has to say. And he made a really almost like an obvious point, but I loved it and it resonated a lot with me. And the whole clip was like, there'll be times in life where you'll go through something traumatic or heartbreak or things that really upset you. These are the times that bring you to your absolute low.
Yeah.
And he said if you were to take a graph almost, all those experiences would actually turn into a net positive in terms of where you end up after in your life. And I thought that's so true. You know what I mean? Like if you've been in a situation where, and again, the breakup is an excellent scenario, like excellent sort of teacher of like hardship and whatnot. I think it's also something that
something happening for you rather than to you.
Yeah, and there's so many things that can happen if you are comfortable in life and you don't feel like you were becoming the best version of yourself when you're in that relationship and that breakup happened. That could be the catalyst for you enacting really cool self-improvement things to become the best version of yourself. And if you look at it throughout time, that might mean that there's a net positive. You might end up being the best version of yourself and you might end up with a partner who truly accepts you for who you are. That could also mean getting rejected from a certain job. I mean, like I got rejected. I remember I touched on it like 10 weeks ago whenever we spoke about it, but I once got like rejected for an internship through like a uni subject.
Yeah.
It was like a work placement, work industry experience sort of thing. And initially I got rejected and I was really, really upset. And then something else popped up and, I can't really say too much about it, but like I loved it. And if it wasn't for me getting rejected in that first instance, I wouldn't have ended up where I am now. And that's like working and like, studying in that sort of area or domain.
Exactly. I had the exact same situation when I first applied for a job in the physiotherapy space as a student. I just wanted to land a receptionist job in a physiotherapy clinic to get my foot in the door in the world of physiotherapy. And that first job was rejected. I was rejected and I'm thinking far out. Well, I don't really know of any other clinics at the time. I didn't really know much about the industry or how to get into it. And you start catastrophizing and thinking, well, am I behind the 8 ball now? Are people already taking up jobs? Are they already getting experience that I don't have? And you really start thinking, what the hell's going on and how can I get out of this? And then, I tried again and applied for something else and I got that. And 3 years later, I'm still there and I've learnt more than what I could ever imagined to have learnt. And I've forged some unbelievable connections and relationships with people that I am working for and with. And it just really shows that things do happen for us. And I'm a big believer in that. And I think...
You weren't a few weeks ago. What happened in your change of thoughts? Do you remember? You were like, sometimes things don't happen for us. Things are just isms.
Yes, that is true. Things are just isms. I do stand by that. But I think when changing the narrative of catastrophizing, thinking that things are happening for me in that moment can be a really nice way to alleviate the pain that we might be feeling in that situation. Because you're right, sometimes things are just isms. Sometimes things just happen and there's nothing we can do about it. It's out of our control and we can't change it. And that might be a hard thing to deal with in that moment. But if we do want to change the narrative and we think changing the narrative is the only way forward for us, just thinking of it as happening for you in that situation might be the first little spark to reignite that flame to keep going and to go again and to get up and find what it is that you do want to find. So yes and no, I know
I put you on the spot there.
But it's true because like different mindsets I think do apply for different situations. So
yeah, I completely agree with you. Like sometimes things just happen and they're tragic and you can't really rationalize it in a way that it happened for you. Unfortunately, like we witnessed, if you witness a family tragedy, someone passes away, you're not going to be looking at that as like, oh, something happening for you. It's
something that does happen.
Just does happen. But rather you can look at it and think, what can you learn from it? I do think you can take a positive thing from the most negative situations.
Yeah.
And look, honestly, sometimes you don't want to do that, and that's okay. Sometimes certain situations are so bad that sometimes just to do justice to the situation, nothing can be said. No lessons should be drawn. But I think generally speaking, when something uncomfortable or bad that isn't something necessarily tragic does happen to you, it's really, really healthy to implement what you just described for us before.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that because that's just life, isn't it? Life isn't all just rainbows and butterflies. Sometimes it is just recognizing that things are bad in life at times, and life has its ups and downs.
Can I say something? And I actually just remembered this because earlier today I'm working at my thesis for uni, and I'm kind of stressing with deadlines. And a lot of the times when I'm at home, I'm catastrophizing naturally, and more times than not, I'm not really stopping myself. But one thing I do, and I try to make a concerted effort, is when I speak to other people about it, I try not to project my stress. I'm sure I got uni mates who are thinking, oh, you're so full of shit.
No, you know what? I actually have noticed that in you. You're very good at, letting us know as a mate that you are feeling stress in that moment, but you're also really good at bringing it back to a point of not making that your character.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. But it was funny because I came in and I said, your mum asked me how I'm going. And I said, yeah, look, I'm really stressed with this and this, but it's all going to pass.
Yeah.
And what I've realized is, even if I don't believe that myself, even though I do know it's objective reality, my assessments are going to pass. I'm going to be fine. Doesn't matter if I fail, or it does matter, but it's not going to mean life or death.
Yeah.
When you start telling people, and I feel like this might be actually helpful, is challenge yourself. When you feel like you're catastrophizing and you're imploding on other people, you tell them, hey, look, this is what I'm experiencing right now, but I actually know it's going to be right. Everything's going to be okay because of X, Y, and Z, and watch their response. They'll actually reassure you.
They will.
Because the thing is, and then just hearing that positivity from someone else will almost, in a way, inform you that, hey, even if you're kind of disingenuous with yourself saying things will work out, other people clearly believe it. They're not just going to say it.
Yeah, I think it has more power in projecting that things are bad for you in that situation. Like you said, rather than saying, God, I don't know what to do, I'm going to fail, it's just not going to happen for me. The person's reaction is going to be the same. They're going to, try to bring you up. Same as with the situation where you say, this is really hard at the moment, but I know I'll get through it. They will still bring you up, right? So they're always going to bring you up in that situation. But by you being the initiator of projecting the first positive word out there, it's kind of reaffirming, right? It's kind of reaffirming the belief that it will be okay, because in that conversation, it's both of you playing that dance of you'll get through this and it's going to be okay, rather than just one of you playing that role of positive affirmation. So if both of you are playing that role, it's going to put it out there in a much nicer way and reaffirm those thoughts that it will be okay for you. That's at least what I believe.
No, you're spot on there. And something I've really come to value over the last few years is I think being able to be composed and really focused in times of high pressure and times of lots of stress. I think that is actually the biggest superpower you can have, because there's going to be times in life where you're going to have to overcome challenging situations and you're going to have to perform, on one time. Think about the sporting event, The best athletes are the ones that can perform well under pressure.
Exactly.
It's why Jake Melksham, when he kicked that winner against Brisbane in round 18, I think it was.
Yeah.
Just his ability to go back, take 3 deep breaths. I don't think he was catastrophizing, thinking, well, if I miss this, we're fucked. He's probably thinking, okay, what's my goal set routine? What do I have to do? And That's why I could go on a tangent why I love performance psych, but it's that ability to know when you're catastrophizing and knowing when to stay focused and composed.
Exactly. And it's that ability to change the narrative in your mind, change that self-talk, have that mindset shift of thinking, you know what could be? What could be, not what could not be in this situation.
And write it down. Like things appear so much more powerful when you actually write things down. I think journaling can be such a cool thing. Even if you're not someone who journals all the time, use it when you need to. Maybe you have that catastrophizing thought, write the worst thing that can happen, laugh at it because it's not going to be based in reality. Then write the best thing that can happen and laugh at it probably because it's not going to be objective reality.
It's
and
probably
then
going to be something in the middle, isn't it?
Spot on.
Exactly. But at least by putting it on the paper, you're allowed to visually see your train of thought and your pattern of thinking, which then allows you to, identify what's going on and then act upon it. Because I know I'm a visual person. So if I'm actually seeing a train of thought or a pattern, it makes more sense in my mind to then follow it up with an action. So love that. But I think lastly, to finish off, it's also just important to recognize that, like I was saying before, added worry is futile. Life has its ups and downs, and sometimes things aren't as big as what we make it out to be. Oftentimes, they're not as big as what we make it out to be. We often think that everything does revolve around us. We often think that the world is kind of out to get us, and if we don't achieve what it is we want to achieve, we are doomed. But time and time again, we see stories where that's not the case. Time and time again, we see those X Factor stories of the rags to riches scenario where, people are coming from rock bottom and achieving greatness. So it's about recognizing that, this is just a part of life. Things do take its turn for good and for bad. And what will be, will be. And I think that's really comforting to know, is that what will be, will be. So I think, just as young adults, we should just crack on with being, the king or the queen that you are, and life will take its turn in the way that it's meant to for you.
That's beautiful, Jeremy. And look, just one thing that I want to mention is that, look, catastrophizing thinking and getting over it can take a lot of time and practice. That means be kind to yourself. Don't be judgmental.
Exactly.
On that note, guys, please let us know. We're going to post a story of D's versus Blues. You let us know your predictions. And yeah, you can also mention stuff about what helps you overcome catastrophizing.
Exactly right.
As if that was the main point of the episode, was the footy.
Coming back to the footy, which we love. But if you have enjoyed, guys, flick us a like. If you follow the show and you suggest it to other people, it really does help us. It does go a long way.
It means a lot.
It means a lot to us, and it, allows us to grow the show and to get our message out to more people, to hopefully resonate with them and make us all better people together. So thank you. Happy Tuesday, and we hope you enjoy.
See ya.